Welcome again, Maria Syans. Maria and I had a great conversation about her work at CPP Games and at EA and her amazing industry background in all forms of marketing. But now it's time to get current. Let's talk about Ustwo. You started as a board member to help Ustwo owners and management team understand each other better and bring more games industry experience to the board. You worked on the strategic plans and they asked you to stay on as CEO and put them into action. Please, can you tell us about that strategy and what your focus is on right now?
Sure. So I think Ustwo Ustwo Games is a very well-known and developer and somebody that I actually really looked up to when I was working in the sort of bigger AAA world. They've created some beautiful games and they have a reputation for bringing an outsider's point of view into what they do. Their background is not in games, and they've so when they asked me to get on their board, it was I didn't hesitate. There was the opportunity to bring my experience in the kind of AAA world to what they do, but also from my perspective to work closer with a tighter, smaller in a way, development team. And I thought that was something that, in a way that the way that I put it to them, it was good for the soul to be able to work with these guys. And it turned out to be exactly like that. It's a fantastic experience over the last year, and so in terms of joining them as a CEO, I think part of the journey that I went through with the board, but also with Dan Gray, who was running the company and is now the Chief Creative Officer. I think we developed a partnership over the last year, and in which I think I have a lot of admiration for him, because he realized that what he really wanted was to make games, and there was a lot of elements around the running of a company that he didn't have particular experience in, that maybe he didn't feel he was particularly good at it, but trying to get good at it was drawing him away from the thing that he loves, and the thing that he is amazing at, which is making games. And I think it was as part of developing that relationship of trust that the possibility of me joining them was became possible. So I think the strategy, and when we sat down and we thought about, okay, what do we want Ustwo Games to be 5 years from now? The core of it doesn't change. The core of it of making beautiful things with people we love, with a lovely team, and reaching millions of people when we do that. That the core of those three elements doesn't really change. And I think the way that I see my role in the company is to create the space for creative people to do their best work. So whether that space comes from securing the funding, from giving the company stability and sustainability in terms of resources, in terms of team, in terms of talent, in terms of money again, whether it comes from helping shape a strategy that gives creative people the space to say, okay, I know I know now what our boundaries are. I have a better sense of where we're trying to get. And then within that, how do I really express my creativity? How do we come together as a team to find that creative expression? So it's my role. A lot has to do with creating that space, creating the possibility for them to feel like they have the resources, the confidence, the trust, the right environment, the right atmosphere for them to do amazing work. So in terms of what the actual strategy is, I don't want to say too much, but I think that I think there's an understanding that the industry is changing. That a lot of the industry is changing. Of course, it always changes, right? I mean, that's the essence of working in games. And if you've done it for a long time, you realize that the only constant is change. So the industry is changing is just it's games. But I do think that there are some fundamental changes in terms of distribution, and in terms of how people access and consume games, that will have a significant impact, not just in the business models and not just in the technology that enables the games, but I think will have an impact on the type of games that are native to that environment. I think often that I'll digress a little bit, so bear with me. Many years ago, I was a student, and I was working on the. I reviewed with somebody. I reviewed albums for the student newspaper, right? And it was a time that the internet was like 90 something, 96 or something like that, and we were all excited by the internet, and so it was my turn to review an album, and when I wrote about it, I said, there are 2 songs in this album that I absolutely love, that are classics that I will think about for years, and the rest is filler, and I resent the fact that I had to buy this in order to get these 2 songs. And I said, and this is what the internet is going to change. Albums are a construct. I was like, oh my God, I can see the future. Albums are a construct of the distribution models and of the marketing models. And this has, it's not consumer friendly. Power to the people. Anyway, I think
you were ahead of the game there.
In a student article, I wish I had acted upon that insight. But I do think that a lot of the games that we consume are inevitably a result of the distribution models and the business models. So a lot of conversations that when you're sitting down to make a game are like, how do I justify the $60 price tag? Are people going to say it's too short? Are people going to say there's not enough content? How do I justify people coming back again? If you're in a free-to-play model, how do I make sure that people are coming back again, and so that I can have and they're spending? A lot of the conversations, a lot of the creativity gets caught up in the business model and creating a game that is successful within the business model. And the business model is a result of distribution and is the result of technology. And so I think, and this is why I think that a lot of the ways in which we consume games are the result of the ecosystems that we're in right now, and that is all changing. With cloud gaming and game streaming, with subscription models. I think all of that is going to represent a change for even the question of what is a premium game. What is the meaning of that question in the new environment? So I think that we don't have an answer for what that environment looks like 3 years down the line, but a lot of our strategy is about helping us navigate and thrive in that changing environment, while being truthful and to the core of what Ustwo Games is.
Thank you. That's a really great.
And sorry that I went a little bit into my own kind of mental journey.
It's it's really interesting to hear how the thinking is arrived at, and you're so right about games industry, the only constant being change. We've seen platform changes and technology changes and multiplayer changes, and then the same cycle of 2D and 3D on console platforms and then on mobile. And I'm really pleased to hear you talking about premium games. For me, when I hear premium, I think, okay, I know I'm going to pay a premium price, but I hope I'm going to get a better game where the experience is the main focus and the creativity is the main focus, outside of the payment model. And so as a customer, I think I'm going to get more satisfaction. So I wish you, all the best with that strategy. I'll be interesting for me to watch that journey, and for our users to watch that journey if we can. And you're talking about, forging this path in premium mobile games at a time when the current fashion is free to play, supremely addictive game mechanics, mobile advertising, in-app purchases. And so it's a brave and awesome strategy to go for premium. What's your or the Ustwo definition of a premium game, please?
Well, I mean, I think that's what that's a big question for us right now. Our next game is being launched with Apple Arcade, and I can't say much about that, but I think one thing that is public is that it's a subscription business. So what is the meaning of a premium game in the context of a subscription business? So I think that it challenges a lot of how we think about the essence of what we are, not the essence of the core experience of what we're doing, but the definition of premium. So that is an ongoing conversation for us. It was easier, in all honesty, to define premium by opposition to free to play. So when everything was free to play in mobile gaming, it's a lot easier to say, well, the transaction between me and the consumer is that I'm asking you to pay in advance, and in result, I'm giving you an experience that is perhaps more crafted, and that is perhaps more time-bound. What does that mean? What does that mean going forward? I don't have an answer for that. I mean, this is something that we are currently exploring, something that we talk to people about. I think, watch this space. I don't really have a very finite answer to that. There are elements of that are important to us. I think it's important to us to create. So the way that we think about it is that we make games that are massively accessible. And when we think about accessible, it's in terms of not just easiness, but let's not assume that people have the very expensive hardware to reach to access games. So that's an element of accessibility. Let's not assume that people have a gaming vocabulary or a gaming know-how. There's so much that as game makers we assume on the other side, because as part of playing games, you develop that kind of cognitive language of course I know what happens here. The light is pointing me in that direction, therefore I need to go in that direction. If you're not somebody who has been playing games for years, that situation is a lot harder to read. So there's a lot of, so when we think about accessibility, we think also as well about not assuming that the person is a gamer. So creating experiences that are massively accessible, but that create powerful and long-lasting memories. So we think that we're very aware that that games have the ability to create very special moments, and games in which you feel empowered, you feel emotionally moved, you feel connected. But very often, these kind of peak experiences of a game are behind so many barriers. The barriers of the hardware, the barriers of the price, the barriers of so many hours of gameplay. By the time you get to a point where you're absolutely moved by something and absolutely you're reaching that peak experience, it's not accessible. So so a lot of the questions that we ask ourselves are, how do you get to that peak experience, that powerful moment, in an accessible way? And so we think, for example, that and this was before my time, but we think that Monument Valley was probably the first time that a lot of people who'd been playing a lot of mobile games but had not played other games, it was the first time that they felt emotionally connected to a character, when they cared about the totem, and with very little story, very little exposition, and even very little sort of story being told. People cared about the totem and the reaction, and that the impact that their actions were having on totem as a character. So that's one example of looking for that peak emotional experience, and then peeling it down to say, okay, how do I get people who've never played a game to reach something like that and see what's core about games? Yeah.
Oh, thank you. That was very comprehensive. I really appreciate that. So in that world, I mean, I can certainly see for myself a greater self-expression, creative expression in a premium model. And you're competing with free-to-play, but clearly you're behind that strategy. And can you tell us, like, what direction do you see mobile games heading in the next few years?
There are many directions, and I don't know that there is one coherent story to bring all of these directions together. On the one end, you've got instant gaming and hyper casual games, and I do think that that path is going to become increasingly creative, and it's going to find its creative voice as a medium. So that's one side of the spectrum, I think. I think on the other side of the spectrum, you've got mobile games becoming, because of cloud gaming, becoming a vehicle to deliver experiences that perhaps have been limited to AAA. So that's another vehicle in which games become even sort of try to replicate the experiences of AAA. And then there is the other vehicle, or the other avenue, which is AR, and AR enhancing enhancing what's going on in your mobile phone, and benefiting from location and sort of and mobility, and enhancing that. I also think that 5G gaming, with the speed, and like the sort of massive increase of bandwidth that it represents, that brings, will also create types of gaming that we haven't seen yet. I have, this is just one thing that has been back of my mind for a while, but I think that there's something around kind of minute positioning in a space, and sort of and kind of multiplayer AR that is kind of like space aware, and is something that I think becomes available with 5G. And I've wondered what would that look like? What would that game look like? So I don't know. I see so many possible paths here, and I think that they're all going to happen. I don't think that there's one common story that sort of joins all of these.
Thank you. That's very insightful, actually. So can we talk about marketing in mobile for a few minutes? I mean, I know people who are spending $4 in marketing to get back to. What are some of the marketing difficulties of getting mobile games discovered, and how do you solve these problems?
So I want to caveat that I'm definitely not an expert in mobile marketing. I've done, up until recently, a lot of my experience has been in PC console, sort of AAA gaming. But having been working within the mobile space for the last year, a little bit earlier from that with CCP as well. It's incredibly difficult to get your game noticed, and paid acquisition is really difficult to master, and I would say almost impossible to compete in versus the big players. But having said that, there are examples of people who are succeeding, and I think that the common thread is there are a couple of common threads. One is they've created something that is so unique that the platform makers want to feature it, support it, so they're getting the support. And so that's not, and I'm not talking so much about the App Store featuring, which is not available to everybody, and it's not as powerful as it used to be. I'm thinking more about partnering with the platform owners to create something that illustrates what their technology is capable of, and benefits from their new features. So I think that that is one path and that's a path probably that we've leveraged the most, both at CCP and now at us too, is to build partnerships with the platform owners and the big technology companies, and understand their roadmaps, their priorities, and work with that. So that is one path. The other path is finding a niche, and I think that there are companies that are being quite successful in some cases in a limited way, but enough to run a good business for themselves by defining a niche, understanding, looking at something that hasn't been done. And I think I think that the more that you can bring in different points of view into your development process, different talent, be diverse, you can start to realize that that the world is huge, and that there's so many sort of areas of interest and so many styles. I think we were talking about this earlier, right? About, you know, making games for old people, and making kawaii games. So yeah, so specialization, finding a niche, connecting with that audience, understanding what that audience wants, and delivering to that, I think, is the other path. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'd feel silly now if I didn't, because we have a huge audience also of PC and console developers. Can you tell us a little bit more about the specifics of marketing on those platforms where you have tremendous experience? Are there some best practices, some shortcuts, anything that, you know, in addition to building the partnerships, of course, which you said was similar to mobile?
So I won't get into like really practical stuff because that keeps changing, right? I'll talk more about the fundamentals. I think to me, what's really kind of best practice and non-negotiable, whether you're doing AAA or little a or indie, is to do the hard work early on in the development to understand what the core and the soul of your game is. And I say early because I think that it's really important to know that as you're going through development. And it's invaluable to know that when you're starting to engage with an audience about it. You know, a lot of games marketing has to do with features and size of, like, how big is the game, how many characters there are, how many weapons there are, and I think that the most successful IPs and the most successful games have done that hard work of distilling kind of the soul. And when you do that, think about sort of like what is the emotional connection that you want to create with a player? Because if you're very clear about that, how do you want the player to feel? That should come through in the game, but then it should come through in your creative, and it should come through in how you talk about the game. And it should, so the games that are doing this best, you can see that common silver or golden thread that goes through. And this isn't about matching luggage of, like, it looks the same, but it goes deeper than that. It feels the same. And it feels the same, not because consistency is important, which it is, but because it's true and it's authentic. So don't try to please, don't try to please everybody. Don't try to make something that is going to be kind of sort of, whatever it is, lowest common denominator. I never know which is it. But that it's going to try to please everybody. And therefore it's kind of reduced. Be clear about that, about who your game is for, how do you want them to feel, and what are the key moments or the key peak experiences in the game that make that come through. And I think that if you know that, then your marketing campaign, your story, your PR, it just flows. So that's one thing, is about sort of really doing that hard work of understanding that. The other best practice, and I think that is to bring in marketing early on. There's this tradition both in console and PC gaming that separation between kind of marketing and development, particularly in the big companies when there is a big publishing organization and then studios. to me, that's nonsense and a recipe for failure. So that, bringing in that creative tension, accepting that there's going to be that tension, like we were talking about earlier, and building that partnership, accepting some healthy tension, sort of from very early on. Yeah, and then I think the third thing that I would say is think about the story that you're telling players. And what I mean by story is the story of your campaign. The why should they engage with you? How are you going to bring them on a journey of your campaign? So whether it's sort of, from the trailers that you're creating to the screenshots that you're creating to even the events that you go to, what's the story that you're telling for why they should engage with you? And very often that is not just the game. It's about the people involved in making the game, and how and why they're making this game, what's moving them to make this game, and the challenges that they're facing in their creative process. All of that, if it's well done, it adds a layer to your marketing that makes it more personable, makes it more relatable, and it isn't just about, well, here's a trailer and buy my game.
Yeah, thank you. And what about reach? How do you reach a wider audience of people?
Well, you spend lots of money.
That's great, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to knowing what's the story that you're telling, and because if you know what the soul of your game is, and you know what that story is, then I think there's one route, which is just create amazing assets, and I think the other route that I'm kind of haven't really touched on is working with your community. Again, it's working early on in development with your community, bringing them along the way. It's not only just going to make you get a better game out there, but it also means that they are they're advocating for you, and you're reaching a broader audience. So I think that a lot of this has been the case where I was at EA, we were doing Game Changers, and at CCP, which are kind of masters of working with their community, and a lot of the things that the rest of the industry does were kind of first tried out at CCP 10 years ago. So working with your community is the other way to substitute for not having huge amounts of money, or just putting all your eggs on the basket of having a great trailer with Keanu Reeves. That's not available to everybody.
Oh, thank you. I mean, that's such a great answer. You covered those three things really well. Thank you. Who do you see at the moment doing mobile games marketing really well? You mentioned that you knew a couple of people.
I think that so obviously the big mobile companies do it really, really well, particularly on the acquisition and paid acquisition side of things. I think King understands branding really well. Obviously, they've had many years to hone in on some of those brands, but I know that I've never had this experience myself directly, but having worked with a lot of people and for people who've worked there or worked with them, there's a lot of thought that goes into the whole branding of the entire universe and the thing. And apparently the story goes that that on what's it called, the big King game with with the what's it called? The big one.
Candy Crush.
Candy Crush. Thank you. Sorry, my brain was having a moment. So apparently, the Candy Crush style Bible and lore Bible is like this thick. There are pages and pages and pages about every character and the colors and how they connect to each other and the levels. And so none of that really is seen by the player, but it just comes through, and it comes through in not just the game itself, but it comes through in the materials they create for the game and the advertising they create for the game. So I think that depth of work is really best practice. And then I was talking about niche gaming earlier, and forgive me if I'm repeating what I said earlier, because it was a few days ago that we started. But there's a Spanish guys called Platonic Games, and they make kawaii games. And I think that the way that they've understood that audience, they've understood what players are potentially looking for, and connected. And so using both very limited marketing budgets, but using the power of the App Store and search terms and videos and their community I think it's really good.
Thank you. That's fabulous. How much of the mobile games marketing is mastering the paid advertising? You touched on it for a moment. And do you have any stories or reflections on this topic?
I think that at the super, at the super top level of success, at the companies that are like trying to scale really quickly, I think a lot of their success is about understanding and mastering paid advertising. But and then there's an entire science about that is not immediately accessible to people who haven't done a lot of launches. So when I was at CCP, for example, we were making an EVE online mobile game, and we decided to publish it with an external publisher as a recognition that we did not have this understanding and this knowledge internally. So not only was the case of like we in order to give the game the chances of success, we needed to put up the money for paid advertising. So you need a company that has that kind of money, which we did. We could have accessed the cash, but it's not so much that. In our case, it was a recognition that partnering with somebody who has released a lot of games would give us the ability to skip over a learning process in which we could have wasted millions of dollars. So that was important for us at the time, and it actually and it turned out to be exactly as we expected, because you start. There's so many things that a company that has released a lot of mobile games in multiple segments and multiple genres understands that if you're new to the mobile space, or you're just trying to scale your business organically, that is just not available to you. So I think that is definitely a barrier, and really, I don't outside of creating a community, working with your community, potentially with influencers, and finding within a niche, I don't know like that there is an alternative for that. If you're trying to to be in a space that is either very saturated and you're trying to go against the big players, then I think that you're not going to be able to do it without if you don't have all of these other things that I was talking about, sort of, a community, and therefore some form of influencers, whether they are members of your community or not, in having a niche and being able to connect with that audience very, very closely. It's definitely a really big part if you're trying to reach a particular level and you're trying to do it really, really quickly.
Thank you. Yeah, wow. There's a whole world in itself, clearly. I mean, do you have any advice in that area for new mobile developers right now, or advice for mobile developers in general?
I mean, I think my advice would be the things that I've mentioned earlier, to try to find a niche and where that has not been saturated. And that sounds a it sounds like, if it was so easy, why isn't everybody doing it? And I think the truth is that people are not a lot of people are just trying to do things that they like to play, things that they have played before, things that they believe that they're going to do a better version of it. But try to think outside of that and try to think about audiences that are currently not being served, and try to think about types of experiences that are not being created. So that would be one advice. And then my other advice would be, as people, more as humans, just surround yourself with people that you like, and work on projects that make you happy, because there's a lot of working in games is stressful, and there is there's a lot of kind of mental health issues that are out there, a lot of burnout, so I think that you should have a core sense of what you want to make, what makes you happy, what brings you joy, what sparks your curiosity, and who are the people that you really like to be surrounded with. I think that, if you're taking care of that, then you're going to be much more resilient as you face sort of the challenges that inevitably come from working in games.
Thank you. Really great advice, really useful. Thank you. I have one more question, if that's okay.
Okay.
If you had your time again, is there anything you'd do differently?
No, I don't. That's not me. I don't. Every mistake that I've made is brought me to who I am today. So no, I wouldn't do anything differently, I don't think. No.
That's great. Thank you so much. It's been really fascinating. I really appreciated your time, both occasions. It's been really
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. And if people want to reach you, can they reach you on social media or something like that?
I'm not a heavy user of social media anymore. I've cut down a lot on that. I do have a Twitter account. It's called Stealth Crystal. But I'm very boring on Twitter. Except when it's Eurovision time, and then I get a little bit excited. So my Twitter account consists of promoting the games and the companies that I'm working with, and then going a little bit crazy around Eurovision. So,
fantastic.
So Stealth Crystal, but don't expect fireworks.
Okay. Great. And did you enjoy this year's Eurovision? Did you think it was
yes,
the right
yes.
track won?
Yeah, sorry?
Did you think the right artist won?
I actually forget who won this year.
I can't remember either.
But I just love the spectacle, and I love the madness and the crazier sides of it. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.